Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video. Here on the table I have the latest power station from Bluetti. This is their new FridgePower. Now earlier this year they revealed this at CES 2026, which was really exciting. And today they are launching this on a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. This system is designed to be a battery backup for your fridge or freezer. With its ultra slim design, it sits on top of the fridge, you hardly even know it's there, and then when the power goes out, it automatically swaps over to the battery inside this unit, giving you over 24 hours of runtime before the battery dies. Now I feel this unit is specifically useful for people that don't want to deal with larger backup systems or maybe don't have space for them. For example, if you live in an apartment complex, you might not have space for a large battery backup and you definitely won't be able to run a gas generator during an outage. So installing this will be able to keep your food or expensive medications from spoiling in your fridge. The FridgePower is also designed for those that have to deal with constant power outages, whether it be through wildfires, severe weather, or hurricanes. As the power drops out, your fridge will keep running. Now quickly going through some of the specifications for the Bluetti FridgePower, the internal lithium iron phosphate battery is rated at 2016 watt hours of capacity. As for the inverter, it is a pure sine inverter rated at 1800 watts. And it has a UPS switchover time less than 10 milliseconds. Now because this is a dedicated UPS, Bluetti has also included the feature where if the power station completely dies and it starts charging back up, it will automatically enable the inverter again, so you don't have to worry about turning it back on. You can enable that within the Bluetti Smart app. Now what if you go through an extended power outage or you don't have a gas generator to charge this back up? Well, this also features a 1000 watt solar charge controller, so you can actually charge this up with solar panels during an extended power outage, or if you want to save money on your power bill, you can also charge it with solar panels that way. Now you might have noticed that there's no DC output on this model. There's no 12-volt socket or USB ports on the main head unit. Now, if you're looking for a longer runtime on the Bluetti FridgePower, they do support expansion batteries. Now, they snap together really easily with a battery cable and a communication cable, and each additional battery adds 2016 watt hours of capacity. Now, on the side of the FridgePower, there is an expansion battery port. You'll see the voltage is 19.2 volts nominal, or it's a 6-cell lithium iron phosphate battery. Now, when the power station's turned on, I did measure a live 19.9 volts at this port. I did find it interesting that they included an 18 watt USB-C power delivery port on the back of the expansion battery ports. I think this would have been nice to include on the main unit as well. So I'm sure you guys are curious about the launch price for the Bluetti FridgePower, especially since it's launching on a crowdfunding campaign. Well, they let me know that this is launching at $759 with sales tax and shipping included. Now that brings the price down to about 37 cents per watt hour, which is really good for a Bluetti power station. Now I will include the Kickstarter link down in the video description and also in the pinned comment if you guys want to learn more. So in the remainder of the video, I'll be doing extensive testing on the Bluetti FridgePower. Now my goal is to provide you guys with as much performance data and information as possible so you're educated buyers. By the end of the video, you should know if you want to purchase this power station or not. Now I will clarify, Bluetti did send this out for this testing video, but that will not influence the actual performance numbers because I put each power station through the same exact performance testing. Now I will start with testing the inverter on this unit, and then because there's no DC output, we'll skip that portion and move right on to the charging demos. So let's get started. In my first inverter test, I wanted to see if the power station could run the maximum advertised load for 15 minutes, which is 1800 watts. During the test, my oscilloscope was showing a clean sine wave output, and I measured 118 volts at 60 hertz. I also measured the total harmonic distortion at full load. I was only seeing 1.8%, which is an excellent result. After 10 minutes of running the maximum load, the cooling fans were at full speed. I measured 51 decibels with my sound meter from 3 feet away. I then used my thermal camera to confirm the power station temperatures. I saw a peak of 130 degrees Fahrenheit near the exhaust ports, so there is some heat buildup inside the power station when running at full load. The FridgePower passed the test and was able to run the full rated load for 15 minutes without shutting down. Now what about the maximum wattage the inverter allows you to pull before it overloads? I turned up the load from the previous test till it got a little over 2700 watts and the inverter shut off. So you do have a bit of headroom before the inverter overloads. So in our next test, we'll be seeing how well the FridgePower inverter can handle surge or inductive loads. The FridgePower inverter is rated at 15 amps continuous or 1800 watts We're going to test with a 10 amp air compressor first. I have my clamp meter in inrush mode. This will show the peak amperage. So 3, 2, 1. So it did power up the air compressor at 23.52 peak amps. Next, we'll be testing a 12 amp vacuum in 3, 2, 1. It did power up the vacuum just fine. We saw a total of 29.16 amps. And for the final test, this is my 15 amp table saw. This is a pretty small inverter, so I'd be surprised if it can power it up. 3, 2, 1. So it actually did power up the table saw. We saw a peak of 30.23 amps. Pretty impressive. Now, one of the main purposes of the Bluetti FridgePower is to act as a UPS for your fridge, but it also can act as a UPS for other devices. I have my oscilloscope connected up along with my desktop workstation. It's advertised to have a cutover of 10 milliseconds or less, so let's see how fast it is. So with the record functionality enabled on the oscilloscope, let's go ahead and test the first cutover. So we'll do that in 3, 2, 1. On the screen, you'll see the results for the first UPS test. Between these two cursors is the cutout period. So we had power coming in from the wall, it cut out, and then power resumed on the power station inverter. The distance between these 2 points is 8.7 milliseconds, so it performed really well. You can see the computer is still running from that first test, so that's good. For consistency, I like to do 2 more tests. So second UPS test in 3, 2, 1. Third and final UPS test in 3, 2, 1. In my next test, I want to use my outlet tester here to see if the inverter has an open or a bonded ground. So with my outlet tester connected, you can see we have one light here in the middle, meaning it has an open or floating ground. Now I've plugged in the AC charging cable, and you can see that it does pick up ground from the charging source, so yes, it is grounded properly when it's AC charging. Now, how much usable capacity should you expect when running loads off the inverter? When I discharged the power station with the resistive load until the battery died, I measured 1700 watt hours of usable capacity. This result is 84.3% of the advertised capacity, which barely didn't meet my goal of 85%. I also completed an additional capacity test with a Bluetti expansion battery connected for a total of 4032 watt hours. When the power station inverter shut off, I measured 3430 watt hours, or exactly 85% of the rated capacity. So an expansion battery slightly increases the efficiency and will help double the runtime for loads connected to the power station. Next, how much power is used as the AC inverter is turned on for a long period of time? Starting with the power station fully charged and leaving the inverter turned on for 12 hours, the state of charge had only dropped down to 94%, meaning the inverter only used 6% of the battery over a 12-hour period, or 0.5% per hour. That's really efficient idle power usage. Now, does the inverter produce any interference? I measured 1760 millivolts of EMI using my dirty electricity meter, which is about average, and connecting my guitar amp to the inverter, I didn't notice any buzzing or crackling. For my last inverter test, I wanted to see how long it could keep my basement refrigerator running during an outage. After 27 hours, the inverter finally shut off and the fridge powered down. That's an impressive runtime for only a 2016 watt-hour battery. So with all the inverter tests completed, let's quickly recap the results, starting with the claim that this will run your fridge for 24 hours. Well, I tested that with my basement fridge, and it did run my basement fridge for 27 hours. Now, when it comes to the power output from the internal inverter, well, it's rated at 1800 watts continuous. I did run that at 15 minutes. We saw a clean sine wave output with very little distortion, and we also saw 118 volts at 60 hertz. So the power output for this unit is very good. Now, as for the fan noise is just a little bit louder than I like at 51 decibels. I can kind of contribute that to the smaller surface area. It uses small fans that spin at a little higher RPM, but just be aware when you're using this for your fridge, it's nowhere near the full power output, so you'll never really hear the fans as this is sitting on your fridge. You only hear that if you're pushing it to the maximum output. Now, of course, this is designed as a UPS, so how does the UPS mode actually function? Well, we saw 8.7 milliseconds for the cutover, which is faster than the advertised 10 milliseconds, and also the super important feature that as this starts charging back up, it will enable the inverter again. So it's great to see that this does work as a true UPS. Now, what about usable capacity? Well, as we discharge this down, we only got 84.3%, so just barely under my goal of 85%. Now, that's definitely within the margin of error. I would say that hopefully a future firmware update will come out for this and just give us a little bit more usable capacity, but as it sits, it is below that goal. Now, the idle power consumption is very decent on this model at 0.5% per hour, especially when compared to other models with a similar battery and inverter size. So it's good to see that this does have a decent inverter that hardly uses any background power. I mean, Bluetti advertised this to use about 4 watts as it's sitting idle. Okay, so moving on to the next section of the video, we're going to be doing a bunch of charging demos. So AC input, DC input, pass-through charging, and dual charging on the Bluetti FridgePower. Now in the box you do get a 14 gauge AC charging cable. If you want to charge with DC or solar input, you will have to purchase those cables separately. Now I flipped the unit around to the back so you guys can see the charging ports. Over here we have the AC input. This supports up to 1440 watts. And then over here you have the DC input. Zooming in, this is an XT60 port. It supports 12 all the way up to 60 volts with a 20 amp limit, and it is rated for 1000 watts. So first we're going to test AC charging input on the FridgePower. Now there are 3 different charging modes. You have silent, standard, and turbo mode. The FridgePower display is very simple and doesn't show much information, so to show you guys what's happening, I will be using the added accessory, which is the display here. You can also use the Bluetti app to monitor what's happening. So I've just connected the AC charging cable and the power station set to silent charging. Now you get that indicator down here with these lights along with this grid input. And if you look right here, we are showing 600 watts input, which is the advertised speed for silent charging. Now I've just upped the setting to standard charging mode, and now we've jumped up from 600 watts to nearly 1000 watts. And this is the advertised speed for standard charging. Now I've just selected turbo charging mode within the smart app. You can see we are getting almost 1440 watts, which is the advertised charging speed. Now in the background, you'll hear some fan noise. When this is charging on turbo mode, the cooling fans do get a little bit louder. Okay, so let's go ahead and swap gears. Now I want to test with DC input. So I have my 1200 watt adjustable power supply plugged into the XT60 port. Now on the screen here, instead of getting a grid input, it shows a solar panel for solar input. I have the voltage on my adjustable power supply set to 13.5 volts, and the power supply is also set to 22 amps, but we are seeing 8.1 amps input, and that is typical for 12 volt charging so that it doesn't blow a fuse in your vehicle if you're charging at 12 volts. So if we look at the screen here, we are seeing 107 watts input and a little bit more here on my power supply at 110 watts. So the accuracy is fairly accurate. This would take around 20 hours to completely fill the power station if it was empty. Now, what if you wanted to charge with 12 volt solar panels? Well, typically they're going to put out around 18 volts at peak power. And so we're seeing 18 volts and 8 amps, or right around 145 watts. So in order to get peak solar input, you're going to need a higher voltage. Now, what about charging with a 24 volt battery? I've adjusted the voltage to 26.5 volts to simulate a 24 volt battery. And we are still charging at 8 amps. So we do need a higher voltage to get the full 20 amps input. So charging with a 24 volt battery, you should see around 200 watts input. I've upped the voltage to 32 volts to simulate a 400 watt residential panel. And now you can see we are getting more amperage input, almost 20 amps. So if you get above 30 volts, you should be able to get the full amperage input or close to it. And now you can see the wattage here is 591 watts. So connecting multiple 400 watt panels together in parallel would give you almost 600 watts. In the next test, I've upped the voltage to 40 volts. So if you have 12 volt solar panels that you put together in series in a 2S configuration, you'll get somewhere around 40 volts. So you can see 40 volts and almost 20 amps gives us about 740 watts. So you can get much more potential in your solar array if you put those solar panels in series together around 40 volts. Now, what about connecting a 48 volt battery to the solar charging port on the Bluetti FridgePower? To simulate that, I have it set to 54 volts. We are seeing 54 volts and 19.4 amps, or right around 1000 watts. So we are able to max out the solar input connecting 54 volts or simulating a 48 volt battery connected to the charge controller. Now, what about dual charging on the Bluetti FridgePower? Well, I've connected AC charging and DC input at the same time. I also have it set to turbocharging mode. And you can see we are getting at 1096 watts input. That's a breakdown of about 100 watts from grid power and 1000 watts from PV input. So it definitely gives a priority to DC or PV input. Now what I'm guessing here is because it's at 85% state of charge, it's limiting the charging input. It's advertised to charge up to 2200 watts with dual charging. So let me discharge this a bit and then we'll try again. So I've been discharging the power station at almost 500 watts for about 30 minutes. You can see we're down to 74% state of charge. Now, one thing that I've noticed is as I disconnect AC charging, it considers it a power outage. That's why it has this red icon here. And you can see it tracks how many outages there are. So I've disconnected this from mains power 7 times. And the Bluetti Smart app also gives you a notification when the power station charging or AC input has been disconnected, just so you're aware that, hey, it's running off battery power. So now that I've discharged this down, let's go ahead and try dual charging again. So I've just connected dual charging again. Now, if we look at the screen here, we are getting 1922 watts. It's going up a little bit here. And if we get a breakdown on the Smart app, that's 1000 watts from PV input and then 900 watts from grid input. And it is going up here, so let's just give it a couple seconds. I'm not sure if it'll make it all the way to 2200 watts, but at least we can max out PV input and then get a very large portion of grid input for almost 2000 watts. Now, what about pass-through charging, or the ability to charge the power station with 120 volts input and get 120 volts output through the inverter? Now, if we zoom in on the screen here, we can see the power station is both charging and powering the load at the same time. So we are seeing pass-through charging. For example, 1630 watts coming in from grid input and 824 watts going out to the current loads. So yes, pass-through charging does work. Now, what happens as we turn up the load on the power station? I've turned on this 500 watt heater here, and you can see that the load has gone up, but the AC charging is the same. Now, next I want to turn up the load even higher, above 1800 watts. We're gonna see if the charging adjusts accurately or if it trips the AC input or turns off the inverter. So the goal here is to stay pretty close to 1800 watts without going too far over, and we wanna see if AC charging adjusts or shuts off. So you can see we have 2265 watts. It's dropping down because the heater is settling down. And you can see the AC input kind of stayed at around 1650 watts. It never really tripped, even though we are pulling slightly over the inverter threshold at 1800 watts. So even if you go over the advertised limit on the inverter, it still continues to charge and it will power the load. Now, at this rate, a little bit above 1800 watts, it will eventually trip the inverter. I also wanted to test the AC charging efficiency, or how much energy it takes to fully charge the battery. Starting from empty, I tracked the usage with an inline watt meter. I measured 2130 watt hours to charge the 2016 watt hour battery, which means the charger is about 94.6% efficient. That's really good. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward with solar testing on the Bluetti FridgePower. Now, the charge controller is rated at 1000 watts, and I will be over paneling it with 1200 watts of solar. I'll explain that here in a minute, but it is a beautiful day. We have very clear skies, and it's almost 70 degrees. Now, taking a closer look at the solar panels that we'll be testing with today, these are the Colsun 200 watt bifacial solar panels. Now, I mentioned I'm over paneling. The reason I'm over paneling is because when you have solar panels wired together in series like this, you need an even set of solar panels. So in order to get near the total output, I could either go with 4 of these solar panels for 800 watts or 6 of them for 1200 watts. So I'd rather over panel it slightly. Now, these solar panels put out around 48 volts at peak output, and the charge controller is rated at 20 amps. So it's gonna be right around that 1000 watt charging level. So I have these 2 panels wired in series, I have these 2 panels wired in series, and then these 2 wired in series, and then those 3 sets are wired together in parallel with this combiner here, and I've just connected it into the power station. So this is a 2S 3P solar array, and hopefully we can get 1000 watts. Now, since there's no display on the FridgePower, we are monitoring the input via the Smart app. If we look at the PV input there, we're showing 911 watts. Now, if we click on that, it'll actually give us a breakdown of the power and the voltage. So 911 watts and 48.4 volts. Now, I feel the power station is kind of limiting the current here. We're not getting the full 20 amps, because if we were getting the full 20 amps, you'd see a bit more wattage here. So 48 volts at 20 amps is more than 911 watts. And I definitely know that we have more than 20 amps available in this solar array. For example, if we break down the specifications for the solar panel wiring and we have set up here, it should be around 48 volts and 25 amps or 1200 watts. And we definitely aren't getting that into the power station. So in my next test, I want to see if the power station will turn on with solar panels. So I've completely turned it off, and I'm going to plug in the solar panel input. So let me go ahead and plug those in. And we're going to see if the power station turns itself on. Okay, I am getting green lights. I heard a click. Let's give it a second here. We got the solar input icon on the screen, and it is charging. So if we look at the smart app here, you can see we are charging again, 924 watts of solar input, and the power station turned on with the inverter enabled because I have that setting enabled. So I have it set so if the power station turns on and there's enough battery capacity, it does turn on the inverter. So yes, solar panels do wake up the power station. So it looks like the max power that we're able to get through these solar panels here is about 925 to 930 watts. Now the final test that I want to do is to see if the power station can have solar panels connected 24/7 or overnight without any issues. So I'm just going to put away 4 of these solar panels. We're going to use 2 of them connected to the power station overnight, and we'll see what happens in the morning. So even in the early morning hours, as the sun was coming up, the FridgePower did start charging with solar input. There were no beeps or alarms. So yes, you can have solar connected to the FridgePower 24/7. Now, I've never really tested a power station with this unique form factor. It's just so thin. Now, it comes in a little bit more than 43 pounds or a little less than 20 kilograms, and I thought it'd be helpful to give you guys the dimensions of the unit. So from top to bottom, it's about 22 3/4 inches. Now from side to side, it's about 13 3/4 inches. Now if we look at the total thickness, it's a little less than 3 inches. Now because this has such a unique form factor, I'm sure people are wanting to use this in multiple ways. So Bluetti has multiple mounting or setup options. First off, they do have this handle that you can mount to the top of the power station with just the screws there so you can carry it around. Second, they do have rubber feet built into the unit. Now that's how I used it. My fridge was pretty flat, so I just set it right on top of the fridge, and it is fairly secure with those rubber feet. Now the next option they include are these twist feet. There are 4 different holes that you just screw these into, and you can screw them in to adjust the height. So if your surface isn't perfectly level, you can do that. And then finally, if you want to mount this on the wall or hard mount it flat in some sort of area, they do include this metal mounting bracket. So just be aware that does come in the case, and there's different ways that you can set this up. Next, let's briefly talk about the warranty and customer support for the Bluetti FridgePower. Now on the Kickstarter campaign, they don't mention a warranty, and also in the user manual, they don't have a warranty, but in the included warranty card, it does mention for the main head unit and the batteries that it has a 60-month or 5-year warranty. So very similar to other Bluetti products that have launched recently. Now, as for customer support, I did call Bluetti. They have a phone number that you can dial. I did speak to a real person about this product, but because it was a pre-release, they didn't have much information. Obviously, they couldn't troubleshoot much. But it was good to know that you can reach out to Bluetti and talk to someone in person. So in the next portion of the video, we're going to go through the Bluetti Smart App. So we'll cover the main page and then some of the new advanced settings that I found. So you just get a normal breakdown. You have your inputs at the top, so PV and grid. You have your state of charge. And then below that, you have your DC output and AC output. Now this unit does have one USB port if you have an expansion battery connected, but there's no DC output if you just use the main unit, so just be aware of that. We have the inverter enabled right now. That's the output switch, and you can see power flowing out to the inverter. Now below that, you have the estimated time remaining at the current load. You have the amount saved in a dollar value based on if you're using a time of use setting or if you are charging with solar input. You get a breakdown of energy statistics, and then below that, you have a new feature saying outages this year. So as you're using the device, how many outages does it detect? We can see 40 outages for a total of 283 hours during the time that I've been testing this. Basically, anytime I unplug it from AC charging. And then at the very bottom, you have your PV generation, which is 6 kilowatt hours of total DC input so far, and then your carbon footprint reduction. Now at the top, you have your advanced settings. So if we go in there, you can see the network settings, which is Wi-Fi connections. Share device, you can share the device with a QR code with anybody else using a Bluetti app. Default connection mode allows you to connect via Bluetooth by default or Wi-Fi by default. And then what's nice is Bluetti does offer a Bluetooth connection password. So if you're in an apartment complex or if you're camping, you don't want someone to connect via Bluetooth, you can lock them out. Now you do have the ability to set the location. That is for the extreme weather alerts. So if you have location services enabled, you can then use the alerts for extreme weather. So if there's some sort of tornado or hurricane, it will automatically start charging the device to 100% so that you can get the longest runtime possible. Now for working mode, I have it set to standard UPS mode, but you do have PV priority, time control, and then customize UPS. And under customize UPS, that's where you have the time of use. Now time of use is helpful because if you are in a certain area where you have electricity rates during the day that are more expensive and then they are cheaper at night, you can have this charge itself at night and then stop charging during the day. And so you can come in here, set time of use, and then kind of what type of settings you want it to do. Now I'm not on a time of use plan, so I don't have that enabled. Now if we go down a bit lower, timer switch is kind of interesting. This allows you to program certain AC tasks. And basically you can have it turn on and off the AC inverter at certain scheduled times. So that's kind of cool. Battery thresholds. This is similar in the fact that you can have the inverter turn on and off based on certain thresholds of the battery state of charge. Now, if we look at the display settings, when you come in here, you can add the display there, and then some of the settings below go into that. For example, the screen timeout. Charging mode we already covered, so you have standard, silent, and turbo mode. Power lifting is if you are running a large load above 1800 watts, the power station will automatically drop down the voltage. You only want to do this with purely resistive loads, that's why I have this disabled. Buzzer switch allows you to enable the buzzer on the power station, so if there's an alarm or when you're changing settings, it does beep. Then you also have the ability to set an eco mode. Now, as a UPS, I'm not sure how useful this would be because you kind of want the inverter on all the time, but if you enable this at a certain wattage, if it doesn't sense any power for like 4 hours, it'll turn off the inverter. For the screen timeout, you can come in here and set how short you want the screen to remain on. For the filming, I've set it to never, but I'd probably set it to like 30 seconds or a minute just so the lights aren't always on. Now you do have the ability to upgrade the firmware. You can see I'm running the latest firmware that's available at the time of filming the video. And then under advanced settings, you do have your DC input source. You can adjust the hertz of the inverter. System switch recovery is super important. This is where the inverter will automatically turn itself back on as the power station hits a certain percent state of charge. So usually around 5% state of charge, it will turn the inverter back on. Make sure you have this turned on if you want this to function as a real UPS. Now grid self-adaption, this is where you have the ability to enable this feature and charge from a dirty electricity power source like a gas generator. And then battery maintenance is new. So I'm guessing that if this senses some sort of imbalance in the cells, you can go into this battery maintenance mode and actually enable it to balance out the cells. So that's kind of cool. Now when it comes to sleep mode, it mentions when enabled, choose sleep mode or shutdown when powering off the unit. Sleep mode allows remote power on via the app. So it's kind of not really turning off the unit completely, but you can re-enable itself with the smart app. So this is kind of cool if you're trying to access it remotely. And then finally at the bottom, you can set your charge limit. So all the way from 100% state of charge down to 80%. So with all the testing completed on this unit, now we can put it through my power station grading system. Now I will say up front, because this is a niche product designed for a specific use case, and it doesn't have the DC output, that will affect the actual score. So just keep that in mind as we go through my power station grading system. So up on the screen, you're going to see the results for the Bluetti FridgePower. You got a total of 7.5 points out of 10 points. Now, just keep in mind, 1.5 points or 3 items is just because there's no DC output. For example, it didn't meet 85% of the DC capacity, it didn't have a 140 watt USB-C power delivery port, and it didn't support 150 watts of DC output. So if we put those aside and just talk about the AC output and all the other features, basically, we missed out on the 85% of the rated AC capacity, and the fan noise was just a teeny bit louder than what I like at 51 decibels. So if we put the DC output aside, it actually got 9 out of 10 points, but with everything combined, if you're looking at a power station that's well-rounded with DC output, it did get 7.5 points out of 10 points available. So let me know down in the comments section what we should do with a power station like this that has a very specific use case, because I know this is going to happen in the future. Think about a dedicated home backup system that doesn't have DC output either. It could function just fine as it's designed, but my power station grading system is kind of meant for well-rounded power stations. So let me know. I'm excited to hear what you guys have to think about it. So here we are at the end of the video, and if we look at the performance for the Bluetti FridgePower, it definitely works well as its designed use case, being a backup for your fridge. All you have to do is set it on top of your fridge, plug your fridge into the inverter, and then plug the charging cable, into the wall, and it's just a seamless backup. As for the pricing is pretty decent as well on their Kickstarter campaign at 37 cents per watt hour. Now, I'm guessing they chose to go with the Kickstarter campaign because this is kind of the first power station of its kind. There's no other power station out there that's designed specifically to be a fridge backup, and maybe to get a little bit of media hype, they went with that route. And if you are one of the first 3,800 people to buy this unit or to contribute to the Kickstarter, then you'll get your unit shipped out in June. That's at least what it says on the Kickstarter campaign. I'm looking forward to hearing your guys' feedback about the Bluetti FridgePower. Make sure you leave a comment down below. And as always, a huge thanks to supporting the channel as always, especially watching till the end like this. I will recommend a couple of the videos that you may be interested in. And until next time, we'll see you guys later.